Right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to something I think is going to be amazing. And we've got no one else but Fionn O'Connor himself to talk us through these amazing pre 70 Irish it's been labelled as tonight. So I shall hand over to him in a second. It's good to see you again. We've had some great drams today, so I'm looking forward to see how these stack up. What would you suggest is the best order for these? Numerical, you think?
We'll start with one, just because it's a mystery. Wished out there in the corner, by the way. Oh, sorry. Yeah, one. We're here in Belfast. Hunters. Hunters is a brand that's kind of been forgotten. It was a Belfast bonder that bonded an awful lot of Scotch, actually. They're mainly known for, in the 60s, getting malt Scotch on its own out of blended form was a difficult enough task. And Hunters were a Belfast bonder, mainly known for even things we would take for granted today, like Glenfiddich and this kind of crack.
Sure.
So there's always the question with some of these, with the Dublin bonders, with some of the Southerners, you can tag them fairly easily, like Green Spot was Bow Street kind of thing. But with some of this northern stock, it's very, very difficult to tell. So I want to start in the deep end with something that's just strange, because a lot of distilleries were closed down in the north, closed down mainly in the 1930s, and we're talking about a 60s bottling that has a 10-year-old age statement. You think, like, where the hell was still alive at that time? Or did they not update the stock name, or were they getting it from the south? So a lot of this stuff is quite confusing up here.
Yeah.
Belfast is infinitely more difficult to deal with than the south because of that ambiguity, because they were getting heaps of stock back and forth between Northern Ireland and Scotland, because they were getting heaps of distilleries closing down just beforehand, and because they could still have gotten southern stock if they had tried. So there is this weird, like, liminal space in Belfast. There's two bottles here from Belfast, Whites and Hunters, and they're both, we had a pre-70s box one that I was very comfortable talking with a certain degree of self-appointed authority about what was in them, whereas here we're in kind of the landscape of, things walk around with, like, tall legs and this and that, and you wonder what exactly they are.
I know from even me trying to research things online, there's not a lot of information out there.
It's not there, and the stuff does, like, tasting that, I gave it a knockback just now. That is not Dublin pot still, because there's always a question, like, okay, are they getting stuff up from the south? Dublin pot still tastes very, very distinctive. And anyone who was at the last tasting will remember those tastes. Bow Street had a kind of a clementine, pithy, orange peel kind of sweetness around pot still oil. Powers smells like shoes. Lemon, back of the shoe, dark pot still. This isn't either one of those. And so you're wondering, like,
it doesn't have that density either, does it?
What the hell is it? It could well be Scotch. To be honest, a 10-year-old in Belfast in the 1960s, late 1960s, what if someone told me that was, and I did a fantastic, I think she's involved in the festival, Justine, I don't know her surname. She does a walk around Leith in Edinburgh.
That's right.
And all blended Scotch. So I was out there for a research visit out to Harriet Watt, and I went with Justine on her walk around Leith and drinking blended Scotch from the 50s and 60s, stuff that nobody pays attention to, the history of old blended Scotch. And if you were to give this to me on that tour, I wouldn't blink. This could well be from bloody, Glasgow, shipped to Belfast.
I think you're bang on. It has a touch of that old bottle effect that we get with some of the younger blends in Scotch. So I think you could stick that in a Scotch lineup and nobody would cry foul whatsoever.
Yeah, it's absolutely this, because what was left up north in the 1960s? Cumber had closed in 1955, 1954, I believe, and Bushmills is still on the go, but this is very clearly not a Bushmills. There's a little bit of peat knocking about, either that or just mustiness, but probably peat and mustiness. Old bottle effect, as you're describing it. If I were a betting man, I would say imported blended Scotch.
Yes.
what was available at the time for a bonder in Belfast. A place called Balmoral, Belfast, bizarrely enough. So even a Scottish name on top of a region of Belfast. But one, there's not a lot of stuff out there, but it's also a great jumping off point, because a lot of these bottles, you are talking about the unknown in one form or another, you know. And here, more than any of them, Hunter's a local brand that is, the more I smell it, definitely, I like to think I can pick out Old Comber and Bushmills relatively clearly, but this is neither one of them. It's watery for start. It's not pot still. It's not the fruit, even, and we'll have Bushmills later on in this tasting, but it's neither of them. It is clearly some stock that somebody has bought in from somewhere, you know, and
just thrown together.
Because we're still in the UK, stock was going back and forth from Northern Ireland to Scotland all the time, you know.
So do you know how long Hunters was around for? When did it sort of fade into dust?
Hunters was on stream early enough, like late 1800s, but died off in the 1970s, I believe. You know,
okay.
It was technically called Hunter and Hunter Co. Limited, and again, mainly remembered for bottlings of Glenfiddich. Oddly enough, despite being based in Belfast, so there is a very distinct possibility this is bloody well Glenfiddich. You know, it doesn't smell like Glenfiddich, even 70s Glenfiddich.
No.
I've never. The oldest Glenfiddich I've had has been the 70s. I've never had 60s, but I can't imagine it's that huge of a leap. It tastes like blended Scotch of the era, definitely. It does not taste like pot still Irish. It does not taste like grain whiskey. It feels like a blended Scotch.
I'm probably not a great blended Scotch either, let's be fair.
Yeah. Well, a lot of them were selling what stock was available. And as the distilleries closed down in Ulster, there wasn't the stock on tap that there had been before. But it's fun, and it's part of the local history of the place. You know, it is a northern brand. Yeah, it is clearly that weird, like, rubbery smell.
Yeah, wet tire.
Tire. It screams of the blends of that era, you know.
Would I mean, I noticed that they used the word liqueur, which I know in Scotch they use to make things sound more elegant and upmarket than they really were. Is that similar sort of tactic here?
Exact. There's some bit bullshit floating around at the moment that liqueur means 12-year-old, but liqueur was just a fancy pants word, really. I've seen, like, for instance, like Dunville's, which we'll have later tonight. When the Immature Spirits Act was passed in 1915, with Lloyd George saying all whiskey has to be 3 years old and above, there's some remarks saying, well, Dunville's liqueur is not old enough to pass. And you think, like, right, okay, so that's what liqueur means. It means absolutely nothing. It's somebody trying to seem fancy, you know. So, yeah, and especially, like, you see it more with age statements. Jameson definitely meant the older Jamesons, you know, which I think is how that narrative is passed into the public space. But, yeah, liqueur, it does not mean... You know, now when we say liqueur, something that doesn't actually legally qualify to be whiskey, you know, but at the time liqueur is essentially a way of demarcating whiskey as fancy, legitimately or not, but, you know, it doesn't mean a whole lot. At best, it means a promise of an age statement. And this is a 10-year-old, which would have been an age statement at the time, a very, very strong age statement, you know, especially for a blend. It doesn't say pure pot still in the bottle, which is another giveaway, because when it was pure pot still or pure malt, they tended to tell you. You know, they tended to announce that fact as one of the selling points. So even not seeing it is a kind of a giveaway, which, again, even more so to me at the time screams blended Scotch, because what distilleries were left? Bushmills making pure malt, Cumber making Irish pure pot still. There was nobody. The last big blender had been Dunville's, and they had been closed since 1936. So it is clearly stock on the go within the United Kingdom. Available.
They've just thrown it together.
Ireland, you know.
I love the label, though, I have to say. It's very eye-catching. That round sort of Hunters with a 10 slap bang in the middle. And of course, liqueur's in the bigger words than anything else. So, you know, very much of its age.
And I will warn people, there's a few labels incorrect on the website. The Redbreast label is incorrect. But you've probably had a lot more blended Scotch, dated blended Scotch than I have. I've honestly, the last time I can count having dated blended Scotch was Justine's tour. Does it
Hmm.
remind you of
It,
older blends?
I've got a few 70s bottlings there of just old Scotch, not even big name Scotch, just like local independents doing their own thing, like regional sort of Scotches, and it wouldn't be out of place in that whatsoever. Very much of that time period. And again, that little old bottle effect, which I subscribe to, but not everybody else does.
Yeah.
I think something does happen
That like
in the
mustiness,
class.
that like cork smell. Absolutely, that weird moldy cork kind of smell.
Yeah.
It's definitely there.
So it's probably the ideal one to start with because it's probably not Irish.
Stephen, is there a way to turn Jason up a bit on my end? Because I'm deaf as a, I don't know what animals are deaf. I'm deaf as an elephant with no ears.
You're quiet through my end, I have to say as well. So